So for step 6, checking the RC equipment. Well, this is where the battery that they wanted you to charge in step 1 is going to be used in order to check everything. And really the only reason for this step is to make sure that the servo is in neutral before you add all of the servo saver pieces. Because if it's not in neutral, these are all going to be wrong when everything's turned on and you've got everything connected to the car. So that is the main purpose of checking the RC equipment. Now in my case, I have a new way of doing this, which makes things a lot faster. But if you want to see this entire hookup here, there's a video right here where I do the full checking the equipment on a Rising Fighter, the Tamiya Rising Fighter, and I'll go through it step by step, showing you how to connect everything so that you can do it that way. But we're going to do it differently in this video. So I will grab all of that and we'll do the servo check. So we're essentially checking the RC equipment. So first off, you obviously need to get your servo for this step. Now in my case, I'm using the Futaba SU300. I'm a Futaba fan. I've been using Futaba ever since I was 13, and they've always been reliable. So I always use the Futaba servos. It was an S148 back in the day, but this is the digital replacement since everything has gone digital these days. So the SU300. Now, again, with this setup, if you in connecting all of this, which is the reason for, charging the battery, you can do it that way, or you can do something much, much simpler, and you can get a servo tester, and mine came with this battery holder, and we're going to plug in our servo into this. Now, I'm just going to go to manual mode for a second, just so you can see what's going on here. But if I put this in there, manual means I can make adjustments myself to determine where my endpoints are going to be. But we want this in neutral. So if you look at the splines, I'm going to push this button, which will take this to the neutral position. If you see the splines there and I push neutral, see how the servo moved? Well, we know now that that servo is in neutral. Now, if I push it one more time, it's going to go end to end, so you can see where the endpoints are. Now, obviously, we don't want that for this step, so I'm going to push this twice over to go back to neutral. So we now know that this servo is in neutral and ready to have the servo saver pieces installed. So I can unplug that, and I'll unplug the battery for that, and we're done. And it's as simple as that. But again, remember, if you need to see all of this and how you would do it, there is the video here that will help with that. But as we've got this all set, we are ready to go with the next part, which is installing the servo savers. So I am going to grab all of the pieces that we need for this, and then we'll come back. So now let's look at the servo specifically, because depending on the brand of servo that you've bought to install in this car, the part that you use to attach everything is going to be different. So in my case, obviously I'm using a Futaba servo, which means that based on the diagram, this, which comes in your parts box, is all your servo saver pieces. But if I'm using a Futaba, you can see that it's going to be a P5 piece. So if you look up here, it showed that this part was going to be a P5 or a P6, which is this piece right here. And the reason it's going to be different is the splines inside of there are going to fit very specific servos. So in my case, I know that the P5 is correct because I'm using a Futaba servo. And you can see, look, Tamiya, Futaba, it would be that one. Or if you've got a Sanwa or an ACOMS, it would be a P6. And if you have a different brand, well, you're going to have to figure out which one is the correct one for your kit. Now, the other side of this is my servo came with this little screw. And that screw is a tapping screw. You can see by the threads on that. Well, knowing that, notice the chart. Depending on your screw, is it a standard screw or a tapping screw? Well, it's a tapping screw. Is it a thin tapping screw or a thick tapping screw? Well, that's definitely a thin tapping screw. So if it's thin, you want a BB4 screw from your kit, which you're going to find in bag B. So that's the screw that we need to use. So if we go back to the top here, you'll notice that up here, it showed a BB1, you'll need a BB3 and a BB4 and a BB5, which isn't totally correct because you only want one of those things. But it's all dependent upon what servo you have. So in my case, this is a BB3. That's the screw that we need. So let's go back to this again. If we grab our servo, you can see that the wire is coming from that side, and it does make a difference, so you're going to want to be watching for that this all needs to be attached at that side. And we already know it's in neutral, so we can put this all together. Now you'll also notice down here that it needs to be at a 90-degree angle to the servo. So if you think of how this is going to go, that's going to face up. Well, let's just try something. If I put that there, notice that it's leaning to the left just a bit. It's not quite up and down. If I move it to the right a bit, oh, look at that. It's sitting to the right just a touch. So that the servo might be in neutral, but it's not entirely possible to get your servo saver piece in the right position because the servo splines aren't matching up, totally correct. But that doesn't matter because later on, we're going to use our trims to set this up correctly. So when you were using this, which you'll see in the other video that I did, you would set these to 0. But we don't need to do that because our servo saver or our servo tester was doing all that work for us. So you have to decide which way looks better. Now I'm just going to take a quick peek to see. I don't think it's going to make any difference which way, because it's almost identical. See, if I put it to the left, we're angled a little left. If I go to the next spline, we're angled to the right. I don't think it's going to matter which one we do. They look pretty much identical. So, geez. Right or left? I'm going to go left. So we're going to leave it there, which means that the next piece, the P4, that's going to go on top of there. Just like that. You can see that sits on top. We now have this piece, which is going to sit on top of that and push it inside. And then we have this P1 piece that's going to sit on top of that. And then we have our screw. So in our case, the BB4 has to go down like that. Now, because this is going to be screwed in, I'm going to hold this in such a way that my thumb is resting against this. Reason being, if you turn this, obviously at some point this is going to move. So I want to try and keep this as level as I possibly can so that it doesn't move on me. And I'm also being very careful when I'm screwing that in that I don't over tighten, because if you strip that out, you're going to have to get a whole new motor or a whole new servo because it'll be stripped out. So you just got to be very careful. I see it's moved again anyway, but that's okay. There we go. Now I'm all the way down and I can move this back to being level. But again, remember, it's not going to be, so we're going to have to use our trims with the transmitter to actually get this to being level. And in fact, I might just make an adjustment with that anyway, but we'll make it work because it won't matter. We just got to make sure that our trims are set so that we have that 90-degree angle. But that's essentially it. That is step 6. We now have our servo saver attached. So we can now move on to step 7, and we're going to attach the steering rods.